Ladies and gentlemen, Binnall of America!
And now, ladies and gentlemen, your host, Tim Binnall.
No commercials, no subscriptions, no network, no rules. And at the end of the day, my friends, no comparison. Welcome to another edition of BOA The Revival. Really looking forward to tonight's program. Our guest is Amy Petulla, and she is the author of Corpsewood Manor Murders. Let me do that over again. She is the author of The Corpsewood Manor Murders in North Georgia. People can't see the video, but I'm holding it up so she can see that I did my homework and read it this past weekend. And also she is the operator of the Chattanooga Ghost Tours.
Correct.
And she's been doing that since 2007. So I think just about almost as long as we've been doing this show. So a very long time. I bet she's got some great stories. We're going to get to those tonight. Amy was involved with the Conspiranormal's Strange Realities Conference many years back. But I think you were online for that. And I was in Nashville. That was right after the pandemic. So people were like, you know what? I think I'm good hanging out at home on the video thing.
Yes, that was
crazy times. But so our paths crossed way back then. And then here, as I was putting together, the springtime programs for Binnall of America, I was like, oh, Amy Petulla. Yeah. So your name's crossed paths with me multiple times. I'm like, let me get her on the show. And I actually reached out to Adam. I'm like, this is Amy Petulla from Conspiranormal from the event, right? And he's like, yeah. And he's like, I had her on the show. And she was talking about this Corpsewood Manor Murders. And I was like, oh, I hadn't really put it all together. So then I looked it up, read the book. What an incredible story, Amy. This is absolutely insane. First of all, welcome to Binnall of America. It's a real thrill to get you on the program.
Thank you so much for having me here. And yeah, you're right. I tell people it's the most bizarre true crime you will ever hear. So
it's really crazy. It's like layer upon layer of really strangeness. Now, we always start out the program with a new guest. Who is Amy Petulla? How'd you get mixed up in all this? You have a really interesting career. I think you might be the first attorney we've ever had on Binnall of America, which is pretty awesome. So how did you go? You're an attorney. How'd you get mixed up in like ghost tours and this book on the murder and everything else? How did this all happen?
I practiced law for 20 years. And decided, if I do this another year, I'm going to be dead. I'm going to kill myself. So my kids and I always love taking ghost tours. It's a really fun way to learn about a city, and it's a great way to sneak in some history without someone realizing that's what you're doing. Mm-hmm. So I decided to do some research when I decided to retire to see if there were enough ghosts in Chattanooga to make it worth people's while. Turns out there's an abundance of ghosts there. So that's how I got started with that. And then with the writing, because I own Chattanooga Ghost Tours, History Press had contacted me maybe 2005 or something like that to ask me to write or co-author a book about the ghost in Chattanooga. So I did that first. After that was done, started writing the Corpsewood book. And they actually contacted me again and said, hey, do you want to write another book for us? And I told them, well, I'm already writing another book, but it's a true crime. You don't handle true crime. And they said, oh, we have a whole division for true crime. So that's how that
Very good. All right. How did you, because I guess this was a major national story at the time. It was just after I was.
They had international news. They had tabloids from Europe flying over helicopters overhead.
Okay. So you were from the area, right? And you were well aware of this story, right?
It was not. This happened back in 1982. Hang on, I'm going to plug in my computer. And I didn't move to the area until 1986, but all the lawyers, since the case happened, the judges, all the law enforcement people have all talked about Corpsewood ever since it happened. They call it the devil worshiper case. And, so I'd heard about it from the time that I started practicing law. And I knew all the people who were involved because, small town law practice, you get to know everybody.
Right.
Then when I started the ghost tour, I started hearing about it from an entirely different angle. So it was the perfect book to write.
Nice. All right. I'm not even sure where to even begin with this story, to be quite honest. I guess we'll start with Dr. Charles. Well, first, as we get into this, I thought it was really interesting, and you mentioned this in the book. There's I think there's one picture of Charles Scudder in the book. There's besides the death photos, of course, but there was no, you're used to sort of reading about these people's lives, and especially nowadays with pictures and cell phones and everything else. It's there's too many pictures of me out there. I wish there were less, but there's no real pictures of these characters very much in the book.
You can find them online, but they're not easy to find. Now, the cover of the book up at the top, there's a tinted picture of Charles, and I think there might be another one inside the book. But you're right. There are not a lot of photos up there of them, and there are 0 photos of the chicken house that figures prominently.
Yeah,
in space.
I have questions about the chicken house. Okay, so what we'll do here is, because I'm loath to be okay, tell me the story, and then we're here. You're talking for an hour, and I'm looking at my emails and shit, and enjoying the being told the story. But it's hey, but I'll do a little work this time. So we'll kind of start. I'll sort of set things up, and you jump in, and we'll kind of go a little bit over this. So, Dr. Charles Scudder, he is a pharmacology type of professor up in Chicago and
at Loyola. So
at Loyola.
Yeah.
And he's working with government LSD to test this on folks.
Besides being the professor of pharmacology, he was the co-director of the Institute for the Study of Mind, Drugs, and Behavior. So you can guess what kind of studies they were doing.
And when was this?
This was back in the I think he started in the 60s. He retired in 75.
There you go. Okay, so he's up there in Loyola. He's had 2 marriages, and then he takes on a partner, which is all very interesting and strange. We'll get more into that. But his partner, Joey Odom, and he's kind of like his.
It's not a traditional relationship, no.
Right, yeah.
Brilliant, extroverted professional guy, and Joey is a shy, retiring, guy with a 5th grade education, and some people describe him as fey, sort of. Not fairy-like, but kind of, he's the kind who would play hide and seek and peek out from behind the trees, and not who you would put with Dr. Scudder as a partner. And it wasn't any kind of exclusive relationship, but they were together for 20 some years.
Yeah. Well, that was the interesting part you sort of point out in the book, and that's kind of why I struggled a little bit to try and define this, because it really was sort of difficult to define, where it was they seemed to be lovers, but there was no sort of outward, public display of affection between the two. It was they were companions.
They were companions and had a deep friendship, and sex was convenient, I think. So, if you talk to some of the people who were friends of theirs at the time, they'll tell you that, they definitely had a relationship. You can't find anything online about what any of Charles's family has said about it. So, basically what you're hearing is from Joey's family and some of the neighbors or whatever. But they'll say it was a relationship. Charles had a lot of different kinds of friends, and I think he kept them very compartmentalized. So there were the neighbors who may have been good Christian church-going folks, and then there were the motorcycle gang, folks who he's supposed to have, some folks have said he'd share his LSD with. There were the outcasts and the high school dropouts and the people on the edge or outside the edge of society. So it was I think it's kind of like the blind men describing the elephant. I think everybody saw different parts, and very few people saw the whole. So
that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. That's a very interesting way to put it. So the beginning of the weirdness, in a sense, begins when Charles, Joey, they come up with some money because Charles' mother dies. And then now I'll have you sort of take us on this journey now. They go down, they decide to move to the middle of nowhere, Georgia, to the forest of Chattahoochee
National Forest, literally the middle of the national forest.
So what brought about this decision, and talk about sort of this move, because this is how it all starts pretty much.
Different things. Charles was getting really fed up with the whole academic rat race, and all these entitled, kids and who didn't really have respect for education so much as, like I said, being entitled, spoiled brats. And then, sorry.
It's all right. Hey, all good.
Then the neighborhood that they lived in, they had a mansion, but it was crumbling and the whole neighborhood was crumbling. So, prices were depreciating, they were going down. And, Charles and Joey had never been a city kind of guy. He wanted to go live someplace where he could have no electricity and cook on the wood stove and, that sort of thing. So they said, great, Charles's 50th birthday, he resigned from the university and they sold the mansion, loaded up the truck with a couple of huge mastiffs, a couple of human skulls and 12,000 doses of government grade LSD and came on down to Tryon, Georgia, population of 1,700 in the deep South.
And what sort of led them to choose that place? Just because that was where the land was available that they were looking for?
Yeah, from what I understand, they had done a lot of looking, trying to find a place that was completely surrounded by the national forest. That's not easy to find. Probably basically you have to find someone who's inherited it whose family's inherited it for generations. So, they found the piece of land and that's why they came on down.
It's really interesting. And I mean, maybe you would know this. I mean, to me, it feels more like just pure speculation, but it's like, why? Like, you would think that it would be inadvisable for an openly gay couple to move down to rural Georgia in the late 70s. To me, it's like, wow, you guys are it feels like you're playing with fire here. Why would you even do that?
Yeah, it was not really a town filled with, the most progressive of people.
Right.
That way. There were a lot of rednecks around. But Charles had always had a real way with people. He was very charismatic, to the point. I think of him, being like the... whoever the doctor was in the Nutcracker, where he was able to pull the puppet strings, and kind of get people to do what he wanted to do. And so they figured they could make it work, and they did.
And then they get down there and they settle into this. This is the craziest. The story just keeps getting more and more as you go along. You're like, what, how? So this doctor and this cook, they move out to the middle of the woods, and then they build a castle out of brick without any real. I mean, this is they
had no construction experience. They read a book. Yeah. Charles read a book on how to do it, and that's it's tiny. It was 1,600 square feet, and that's over 2 floors. So it's a tiny little castle in the middle of the national forest. I've heard some people speculate that their lack of experience is the reason that the walls were rounded, sort of oblong shaped. I don't know that that's necessarily the case, but it may have been something that they planned. But they figured that anything they could put their minds to, they could do it. Charles had written an article for Mother Earth News about living in the forest and how it takes very little to actually live on your own. Surprisingly, I think they lived on $200 a month that he got from the inheritance. So
right, yeah,
but that's what they wanted.
And because Odom was injured in this car wreck on the way down there, so Scudder's the one building. He's actually, I mean, it's hard to even fathom, building brick by brick this castle in the forest. It's really
And it's
stunning to me.
It's built like 3 layers thick. The bricks are with air in between, so it was really well insulated because they had no electricity. So that's how they kept it from being too hot in the summer or too cold in the wintertime. They had a well dug. They buried a small like icebox refrigerator out in the land. You can still sort of see the remains of that out there to keep things cool. They had, built an outhouse and a well house and so that they used wood stove for heating and for cooking and kerosene lamps and candles for light. And there's a lot, there's windows, several slit windows in there. So it would bring in some of the light too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, reading the book, like I just kept kind of wanting to go through this. It's not even there anymore, so you can't, but it's like,
it's not.
I'm sure you have the same feeling in a way where it's just like,
I built a recreation of it, and you can find the YouTube video that kind of shows, what it was like. It's a small model and obviously not, exact to scale, but I used a lot of photos from the property to help create that.
Oh, wow. I gotta look that up. Okay.
Yeah, check it out.
Yeah, because a lot of like reading the book, I'm like, I just want to go into this because it's like so hard to fathom. You hear the story and you think like, okay, this sounds like something from like the 1800s or whatever. But like we're talking like 1970, 77, 78 when they kind of really get settled in there. And it's like, okay, they're living in I don't know, like a eccentrics kind of like brick castle. Like it's not, something they just made from their imagination. And there's no light inside. There's no electricity. So it's like everything must have been lit by lamps and sort of
like I said, they had the windows.
Right,
they had
right.
glass block in there or some places they had stained glass or whatever to let in some of the natural light from the outside as well. So
right. And then, see, this is like, again, I love this story so much because we haven't, okay, so, all right, folks. So as if we hadn't kind of got you all set up with this crazy story first. I neglected to mention that also, and I don't know necessarily about Joey, you can maybe clarify this with me, but we know for certain, and I thought it was really interesting in the book that you say that you originally thought one thing, that I actually underlined it in the book. And then you say to your, commendably, you wrote, I was wrong, that you had thought that he was a pagan, that this was kind of all a show. But it turns out this Dr. Charles Scudder was like a hardcore Satanist, member of the Church of Satan.
I'd say he's hardcore, but yeah, he definitely was associated with the Church of Satan. He'd I think spoken to Anton LaVey. He'd mailed in checks, to the Church of Satan. There was a lot of artwork and symbolism and things inside the manor, that referenced that. Of course, there were there are other things too. Like I said, he had a really wide range of interests. So, and that was all reflected in the manor, but that was definitely that was the part when the police first came in there after the murders that really freaked them out, along with gay sex stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like I said, it's a lot of different strange elements to this story. Yeah. So these two guys in this openly gay sort of companionship relationship, they moved down to Georgia. They built a castle.
Not to mention the Jeep they came down in had huge inverted pentagrams on each side of it. So
there you go. Okay. Yeah. We're painting the whole picture here for folks. So they come on down to Georgia. They move to the middle of the woods. They build a castle in the woods. Meanwhile, at least Scudder is a Satanist. It was Odom really into this much at all. It was like, oh, that's a good thing.
What I understand, everyone has always said that Joey actually still considered himself a Catholic. Obviously, I don't think he was he wasn't a church-going Catholic, but that's how he was raised. And if he was going to give himself any denomination, that would be it.
Right. Yeah, well, I certainly got the impression that Scudder was kind of like the dominant one in the relationship. He was like the Svengali, if you will, of the two of them.
Well, Church of Satan attracts a lot of intellectuals, and so that was right up his alley,
Yeah.
So
yeah.
And can I just clarify? I do this every time I do this talk, but Church of Satan does not mean they were devil worshiping. Church of Satanists don't believe in God or the devil. So
Yeah.
it's a way to, the name is a way to poke fun at Christians. So.
Right, exactly. Yeah. But people never get it right? Like people who don't. I'm aware of it because I've been in this crazy field for years. So it's like I'm aware of that. Yeah, but people on the outside are always just like they usually have the wrong interpretation of it. And they think they're worshiping Satan, where it's like no, they don't do that. They kind of just take the left-hand path, or however you want to say it.
Yeah, in Northwest Georgia, it's been known since it happened as the devil worshiper murders. So that that doesn't help things any. But but yeah, it's the whole thing with the Church of Satan is do what feels good, as long as you're. And some of them will say as long as you're not hurting anybody else. It's a very self-indulgent idealism. So.
Yeah. Okay, so they're settled it. Now let's talk about the chicken coop and the pink room, because this is another one where I was like really trying to sort of wrap my head around the logistics of this, like how even this worked. So detail the chicken coop and how it leads up to chicken house and how it leads up to the very mysterious pink room.
Okay, yeah, it's a three-story structure. On the bottom floor were chickens. They raise their own chickens. They raised a lot of their own food, that sort of thing. Middle floor, were some canned goods, and a lot of people have said there was like a pornographic library there. Some of their friends who always visited them, I think, in the manor and not in the chicken house, have said no, that's not true. No photos that I can find of that. I have been asking around. I actually had somebody just contact me yesterday saying, I've been inside the chicken house. I was like, call me, tell me what's in it, tell me what it looks like, and then the third floor is the pink room, and that's where they entertain guests. It had no furniture other than a couple of pink sheeted mattresses and pink shag carpet on the floor, and I think a lamp and probably a wood stove in there for heat. But a lot of stuff. Yeah, they shared their homemade wine, with a lot of people up there. I imagine, if they had any of their friends that did partake of anything stronger, that's where they did that at. They had a lot of sex in there, I think. So that was the entertainment room. They didn't want to have a bunch of people that they didn't know really well coming inside the manor. So that was kind of a way to keep some distance.
That makes sense.
To get to that pink room, the ladder, from what I'd always thought was that it was on the outside. The guy that contacted me yesterday was saying something about you had to go inside and then you had to climb up a ladder that sounded like maybe it went outside. I don't know, but it was not. There's no stairs in there. It was
right.
easily accessible. So
yeah, that's what I was I was trying to wrap my head around that too. Throughout the whole book, I always imagined the ladder kind of on the outside. To some kind of like entrance.
Right. And I think the ladder is on the outside because they had to get him down after they tied him up down that ladder. So I'm pretty sure that was on the outside. So.
And how big was this? Because it's just hard for me. I saw the picture of the chicken house and it's hard to imagine like this room. Like, I guess they could stand and walk around and it was just a sizable sort of empty space, right?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't look very big, maybe 10 by 10, and then, the 3 stories high. So
okay,
it's taller than it was wide.
All right, yeah, because when everything goes down, as we'll get to later, it's like there's like 5 people in the room, and it's like, so in my mind, I'm like, Are they all cramped up in this room? Or is it enough room for 5 people? So it's like, okay.
Well, I know there were at least a couple of mattresses there. So, they probably had 2 or 3 people on each mattress. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. So essentially, until things go sideways for the couple, they're there for like 5 years.
Yeah, they were living their best life. They were doing what they wanted. They were off the grid. They weren't having to answer to anybody. They could do what they wanted to.
And during this time, it's kind of like this. I don't know necessarily how secret it was, but it was like this is where you went if you wanted to have some gay sex, right? It was kind of like if you could get into that community and sort of like if you knew a guy who knew a guy, you could you want to go out to there kind of thing, right? Is that sort of
I don't know how much of how widely known that was or how much they had with the community. I know a lot of the the letters that he had were corresponding with prisoners. So, those people obviously weren't showing up very often at the door or whatever. But yeah, one of the murderers, I know that Charles had, I think, oral sex with him, multiple times. So, that I think probably what happened was people would come around, they'd hear, hey, you can get some free wine there and, whatnot, and come check out these weird guys up here, and they let it be known they were gay, but they weren't the kinds to force anything on anybody. So.
Right. Yeah. Well, that was the interesting part too, where it's like, okay, it's kind of, I mean, they're living in the town technically, right? So they're in Tryon.
They're not inside the town.
Right. Yeah.
Like I said,
they're community members in a
to
sense.
get to this place, you have to really work at it. So
okay, so they're on the edge of town. They were the gay couple.
I mean, it was down a logging road. That's where they lived. So it wasn't someplace that you're gonna be passing by, and see, hey, look at those pentagrams on those chimneys up there. You're not going to see it from the road. So.
But the people in town knew these folks were out there, right?
Some of them did. Like I said, started out with the outcast people, that kind of found their way there. Some of the high school folks, because I mean they didn't ID card people, ID people before they gave them some of their wine. They showed up, they wanted some, sure, they'd share.
Right.
The sheriff of Chattanooga County was a big man in every way, physically, personality wise or whatever. He had his finger on everything that was happening there. So I think he probably knew from very early on that they were there, and probably kept an eye on it. But as long as they weren't causing trouble, he wasn't going to mess with them. So,
yeah. And so, yeah, okay. So there was secluded enough that like people could kind of come and go from out of town and that kind of thing. And it was just like no one really sort of a live and let live thing. It's like, hey, look, what's going on out in that castle? We'll just let them do what they do.
Right. But there were a lot of people that had no idea when it all came out. I mean, there were tons of people in the town that at least would say, wow, I had no idea there was anything like that going on around here, so whether they did or not, I don't know. But that was a popular expressed sentiment anyway.
Well, what I thought was really interesting in a sense too was you mentioned that, and it's since gone missing in the tumult of the post murder in the case when it all went down. But there was a book that people would, like a guest book that people would sign, which I found really kind of surprising given the era where it was like, I would think that people kind of wanted to keep this on the down low, but apparently they would sort of leave their name in the book when they would come to visit the Pink Room.
There have been rumors since this happened about the guest book. There have been rumors about some of the well-known people in town being in said guest book or whatever. There have been rumors about. There were photos, there have been rumors about, there were things about sexual preferences, but nobody, could come forward and say, here it is. I have figured out what it is. I have another book that's coming out this year sometime, and I'm going to put in there, and I think I'm probably the only person who figured it out because I talked to a number of different people, and some of them are, and get some information about some folks who are actually dead now. But yeah, it was not actually a guest book, but there's some reasons why people got that impression. But there was a collection of things about people who visited. So
okay, all right, maybe not necessarily a book, but some kind of log in a sense is kind of what you're alluding to in a way. Yeah. Okay. Now, do you think that it was like, because the impression I got sort of was that like, okay, this all went down. And like you were saying, there are people who were like, oh, I didn't know that was going on out there. But like my thought was like, okay, there must have been like you said, maybe some prominent people in town who did know what was going on, who were visiting. And then when it all went down, they're like, okay, we got to get my name off this bedpost or whatever that it's scratched onto, or however things were being kept track of there. Seemed like it was kind of like we got to scrub this thing of any sign that this prominent guy in town, businessman or politician or whatever, like was a frequent visitor to the Pink Room kind of thing.
Pretty quickly after the murders happened, the chicken house was burnt down. So, and no investigation into that one. I don't know if I've heard rumors about who did that one. And then not long after the trial, the home burnt down. And the rumor on that one has always been that it was a group of preachers that did that. But again, nobody ever even opened an investigation as far as I know about that. So, it was one of those, let's not stir up trouble. Let's just leave this one.
Yeah. And now, obviously, you've gone over all the files with like a fine-tooth comb. You studied this case backwards and forwards. I take it, because I assume they would be in the book, there are no pictures of the inside of this pink room or even the inside of the chicken house.
No pictures inside the chicken house at all. And I have been looking for years and years. There's, the pictures of the outside of it, but I can't find any photos of the inside of pink house, of the pink room or the chicken house. I got plenty of pictures from the manor, but none from that building.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, interesting.
There are so many wild things about this case, and
yeah.
it really leads to another question. It's one of those rabbit holes you can keep going down for months.
Yeah, for sure. It's really kind of, like I said, it gets wilder and wilder as you go along. It's like, okay, all right. Not only were these gay companions, I can keep repeating the story, catch people up. And all these gay companions, they decide to move down to Georgia. They build a castle, but they also have a crazy sex room, a secret crazy sex room on top of a chicken coop that like people would come and hang out and have sex in. It's like, what the fuck? So that's kind of my reaction. That's how I was reading the story. One of the things I thought was really cool, and I think I might have to steal it from Dr. Charles Scudder, when people would show up at the house, he would instead of calling out who is it or who's there, he would say, "Who am I?" And it was like some kind of code that if you were in the know, sort of thing.
See if there's somebody that's friendly or who knows what they're getting into, or whatever. So that's they moved down here to what was not really a gay friendly community, but they did take some precautions like that to be able to protect themselves. And they had people that would come by that were just looking for trouble, that had heard about him, came out there looking for trouble, and he was able to, up until the murders, disarm them. And even during the murders, he got that paused for 20 minutes or so too in the middle of it.
Yeah. Well, I thought that was interesting because, like I said, while you sort of added the elucidation that, like, okay, not everybody knew this was going, enough people knew that, like, if there were people that wanted to be, problematic and to cause trouble, they could have gone out there. But it seemed like these guys were allowed to live in harmony. I thought it was really interesting that they were friendly with, like, the biker gang, which you wouldn't think that, like, the two eccentric gay Satanists out in the woods would be friends with the biker gang. But apparently they did kind of connect over drugs.
That kind of attitude. That was both those groups, sort of thing, and that worked for both of them. So
yeah.
But as far as the people showing up there, I mean, you think you get somebody like that, a real redneck person, and they, as soon as they hear about something like that, they're going to think, I don't believe it. I'm going to go out there and see that for myself. And if there is, I'm going to do something about it. But like I said, he was able to disarm them. But there were a fair number of people that didn't know them that would come by because they heard about it.
Yeah.
See it for themselves.
Talk about the dogs a little bit, because that was another kind of sort of interesting side characters, if you will, to the story. These two dogs that they had with them. Yeah,
like I said, they were huge mastiffs. From what I understand, standing on all fours, they could look you face to face in the window of your car. When you're sitting there. That's the way people described it. Their names were Beelzebub and Arsanath, they weren't. I think they had them very, very well controlled, and they weren't the kinds that would, attack.
Right.
But they would
intimidate,
for sure protect them, and they were enough to intimidate anybody who came up there looking for trouble too. You got a dog looking at you like when you're sitting in the car and you're eye to eye with it, you're going to think twice about opening that door.
Right. Yeah, for sure. I think you mentioned too, and this is a claim that Scudder made. We don't know if it was true or not, but that, like, the dogs were trained to if someone showed up and no one was home, the dogs would let them get out of the car, but then the dogs would sort of maneuver themselves between the person and their car. So it was like the person was trapped now at that point, in case they were up to no good kind of thing.
That is one of the things I heard. I don't know that it's been a while since I've researched this, but I don't think I've ever spoken to anybody who said they actually had that happen to them. But
Right.
that's one of the many rumors about this case.
It's a fantastic, so many interesting stories. So it goes, they're living their best life out there in the woods.
Mhm.
And then things go south, and that's when it turns into this murders. Now, let's talk a little bit. I guess give me sort of a thumbnail on these two characters, Tony West and Avery Brock, who committed the dastardly deed.
Avery Brock was a 17-year-old who'd been kicked out by his stepdad, and had the misfortune to move in with Tony West. Tony West was a career criminal. He had, when he was, I think, 12, something like that, killed his 2-year-old cousin, shooting him point blank in the face. He later said, "Oh, I was just trying to show him that guns weren't dangerous." He later shot his uncle over a card game, and he'd been in trouble his whole life, So Kenneth or Avery first met them when he was hunting out in the woods. They let people hunt on their lands, so they encountered him that way. Charles encountered him that way. And like I said, they wound up, he invited him up. They had some wine. He came a few different times and engaged in some oral sex. One of the times that they came, Tony came with him. And that started happening, and Tony was like, "Oh, not my thing. Leave me the heck out of this." But then afterwards, he really made fun of Avery over it, and that's when Avery started getting really abnormally angry. To the point where he had fantasies about raping them with a red hot soldering iron, beyond the pale kind of stuff. And I think what it was, he was really embarrassed. So he worked it out in his head that it wasn't his fault. It was these guys had taken advantage of him or whatever, even though he came back for more multiple times.
Right. He kept coming back. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, I can see the psychology at play here. It's pretty clear. Yeah. That the other guys, and then he's like, busted, right? And he's getting more angry because this guy is giving him grief about it.
Right.
Different time and era, he might have been like, "Yeah, man, I'm gay. What do you want from me?" It's like, I'm having a good time in the pink room. I'm getting wine. It's a party. Sorry, you're not into it. But back then it was like this caused him to snap, essentially.
Yeah, and I mean, like I said, this was 1982. This was not. Things were still really conservative, all over, then, and especially in a town like this. So anyway, Avery got really angry, like I said, wanted to not just kill him, but torture him basically in the process. Tony, he didn't care anything about that stuff. He wanted the money. He figured, here's these two gay guys living out in the middle of the national forest where nobody can hear them screaming. They must be rich because they don't have jobs and they manage to live and do, whatever they want and, have drugs, whatever it is that they want. So they must be rich. So he wanted to rob them. And if somebody got hurt or died in the process, well, no big deal as far as Tony was concerned. So that's how this plot was hatched, to go up there and rob and or murder them. They had different intents, but neither one of them had good intents.
Right. That's a good way of putting it. Yeah. Different sort of motivations there between these two guys and turn into a combustible situation. I thought it was really interesting. So they bring along two teenagers, essentially. Like, this is like such a Dateline episode where it's just like people commit these crimes and they do the dumbest shit. And it's
nobody. The best explanation that I've ever heard anybody come up with is they had it for cover so that nobody would think there was anything funny going on. But I mean, they'd been up there by themselves before, so I don't know why they think they need to bring a couple people along for cover this time. But Joey Wells was a relative of Tony's, and there have been rumors about that one for a long time saying that Joey Wells was actually in on it. And I think that Avery, when he confessed and pled, he said that Joey was in on it and that he'd gotten some of the stuff, some of the property that was taken. Joey denied that. They didn't charge him, so he has kept his mouth shut his entire life about whatever happened with that. The girl, though, Teresa Hudgens, had no idea what was about to go down. She was on sort of a first date, blind date kind of thing with Joey Wells. And as far as she was concerned,
I said that's quite a first date.
Well, when you're in a small town, riding around, huffing glue, which is what they were doing, going up, drinking wine. I mean, that's a date,
Yeah, oh, yeah, for sure. No.
And, a lot of small towns all around America, not even just in the South, So, yeah, that's what they said. Hey, they're riding around. Like I said, they call it Toodaloo. So it's like a mixture of glue and some other chemicals that you really don't want in your system. But they said, hey, we know these guys, up the mountain that, they make their own wine and it's pretty potent stuff. So let's go up and visit them and, get some free wine. Okay. Yeah, sure. That's fine. So that's how they persuaded them to come along. So, and that's how it all started.
Okay. Now I'm going to break the narrative a little bit because I just do want to ask. You mentioned Joey Wells, so he's kept his mouth shut ever since. So that he never faced any legal ramifications for what went. I'm really surprised that, given that, I just am kind of surprised that, generally when these two other people, Joey and Teresa, weren't just roped in on the prosecution of this, you know what I mean? And I guess they were relied on as witnesses, but generally, I always just suspect from watching too much Dateline that they all would have got charged for being mixed up in these murders. But I guess those two kids didn't ever see any, legal trouble from all this.
The judge in this case, who I had the joy of practicing before when I used to practice law, it was he made the remark, there's no way the people of Chattanooga County are ever going to convict a couple of guys for, killing two, or ever going to give the death penalty to a couple of guys who killed two queers. I mean, that was his thinking. So, so they wanted to go after the guys who actually committed the murders.
Yeah.
And if they brought in the teenagers, that would have just muddied the water some. I think
Gotcha.
It's kind of the thinking on that one. And it was more profitable for them to have them there as eyewitnesses. So.
Right. Okay. And the other question, just to again step out of the narrative. So you say Joey Wells has been silent all these years, and I assume because it's Amy, you are like the preeminent Corpsewood Manor. After I read the book, I'm sort of looking up, Googling it to see if there's anything more. And every article I pick up is I read is just references back to your book. So it's like you are the preeminent Corpsewood Manor expert here. So is Teresa silent? Is she still around these days? I would assume you've reached out, tried to talk to these people, but is there any communication at all? Or are they just done with this case and not talking about it?
Joey Wells, like I said, he's not talking about it. I pulled up his criminal record the other day. It filled up my whole computer screen. He's been in trouble the whole time, so he's not easy to get in touch with because, he was incarcerated a lot of the time. And even if I had, he's not talking about it. Do you know there's a guy named Trevor that I think may have tried to talk to him, but I don't think he got a lot of information from him. Teresa has written her own book. It's called it's called Corpse. Well, she co-wrote it. She had somebody that did the actual writing. She told him the story, and I think she gave him some poems or stuff too. But it's called Corpsewood, the Eyewitness Account.
All right.
And I've seen Teresa a couple times at some book signing events and things like that. And she's really nice, but she doesn't want to go back. She wrote the book. She didn't want to have to go back and recount all that. And I think I'm sure that it really screwed her up. I mean, I can't imagine going through something like that and not having it screw you up some. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So it's not like you don't have an antagonistic relationship with her or anything crazy like that. It's
not at all.
Okay. Did she? It would be interesting. Do you have any idea if she read your book? It would be interesting if she read the book and was like, "Love the book, but here's A, B, and C that you didn't know about or whatever." Did anything like that happen?
To do that, like I said, I think she doesn't want to really think about it. And as far as I know, she's not out there doing book signings anymore. I think she did when the book first came out, it was really weird. For 30 years, nobody, other than a little booklet that came out by the newspaper right after it happened, nobody wrote anything about Corpsewood. And then I made the mistake of saying that, I was working on a book on Corpsewood. Suddenly, five different publications. Some of them were just crap that were self-published on Amazon, that were, you could only get, or fiction accounts or whatever, came out. Teresa's and another one by a fellow named Daniel Ellis, and mine all came out right at the same time. And like I said, then those other couple of things that were it was like, oh, they're the devil or whatever, came out around the same time. But those aren't even worth mentioning the names of those. So
there you go. Yeah. And all right, so we'll jump back to the story now. So based on your description, no, that was me that took it off course. Don't apologize. I kind of got ahead of myself because I was like, oh, I really wonder what happened, after the book came out. What happened with these two people? Because they kind of vanish in the book after a while. They're like, all right, you never really find out what the hell went on with these two who are out roaming the streets still.
Teresa's dropped out of the spotlight, and Joey never was in it in any kind of good way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't know if we will want to connect with Joey these days.
I think he probably has always been afraid that he'd get charged, if he opened his mouth. So
I could see that. Yeah, I could see that. Now, I take it from your description, you have not tried Toodaloo, because I was like reading the book.
It's not my kind of thing.
If Adam Sane is listening, if you bring back Strange Realities some year in Nashville, we'll mix up some Toodaloo and have it out on the back porch at side.
Yeah. No, that was one of the big things for entertainment, huffing that stuff, and among this group of people.
Yeah, I had to stop myself from going on Google to try and look up a recipe. It was like paint thinner, glue, and alcohol. I'm like, all right, what's the combination here? What's the magic?
It really matters that to the people who use that. I think it's just whatever you happen to have on hand, just pour it all in.
Give you a little of that Toodaloo. Yeah, sounds good. So they're all hopped up on Toodaloo, and the four of them go there, and they meet up with Charles. Joey's in the house. Take us through what happens here. When the murders go down.
Okay. So Joey's in the house cleaning the supper dishes. Charles takes him up to the pink room. They sit around and drink sunfish glass for a while, whatever. And then Avery Brock goes down to the car, comes back with a gun. And Charles, like I said, really good at diffusing situations, decides to make a joke out of it. And he says, oh, you got a gun. You want to play some games? What kind of game do you want to play? I'll play your game or whatever. And everybody laughed. And that just diffused it for 20 minutes. I can't imagine having somebody who's come over there with the intent of killing someone. And, he manages to get him off track for 20 minutes or so. Yeah. But eventually, he comes, back around to what he's there for. And so they, rip up the pink sheets, tie up Charles with it, or they're demanding to know, where's the money? Where's the money? Blah, 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 where's the money? And he's telling them, there's no money here. And that was true. They did not keep money around the house. The only thing that the murderers wound up getting out of all this was a bag of nickels and dimes, a sword that was encrusted with some jewels, and then they stole the not at all inconspicuous Jeep with the huge pentagrams on the side of it because their own car wouldn't work, which that's another part of the curse of Corpsewood, but we'll talk about that later. And I think they got some like candelabras or something like that. That's all they wound up getting. But so they were demanding that. Kenneth gets mad, goes down, shoots Joey and the dogs who were sleeping. So they decide they're going to get Charles out of the chicken house, make him go in the manor and show him where the money was, the non-existent money. So I don't know exactly how I haven't put it together in my mind how they managed to get him down this outside ladder.
That's what I was just going to ask you.
Yeah, got dropped a little bit at the end of it, but because he's still tied up and gagged.
Right, right.
So, they take him in the house. Well, he sees Joey and he just kind of lost the will to live. He felt like it was his fault. that this had happened to him. There are dozens of really, really bizarre things about this case. One of the really eerie things is that morning, a friend of theirs, Raymond Williams, had come over and had recorded Charles playing the harp and reciting William Blake's Tiger, Tiger, Burning Bright poem, featured prominently on The Mentalist, I know, among other things. But I mean, it's a weird poem, and a lot of folks would say that William Blake had a real Church of Satan kind of mentality. It's kind of he professed to be a Christian, but it was sort of warped. So they had this recording, and somehow the recording, which got left at the house, from what I understand, somebody hid it. So this weird recording is playing the whole time. They're like forcing him to search the house, and he's just seeing this person. In Tiger, Tiger, is about God made the lamb, but he made the lion too, basically, that sort of thing. You've got the darkness and the light, and they're both there.
So this is playing while this is going down.
Oh, this is what? Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't pick that up in the book. Wow.
Well, the other really weird thing about that poem is I had not heard that, and I had never seen. There's a really bad documentary that was done by the church lady who, she was like really one of those about, this is all satanic, and she worked for Dove Network or something like that.
Yeah, I have that in my notes.
Yeah. But she had that recording in her documentary. I had never seen it or whatever. And when I first started writing this book, the very first thing that I put in there, without ever having heard any of that before, was that poem. Later on, I decided I didn't want to have it first. I wanted to move it to the middle, and I wound up putting in the chapter about the Church of Satan. But when I saw that documentary and heard that, I mean, my jaw just dropped.
I bet. Yeah. That's an eerie synchronicity. You had no idea that was playing. That's my mind's blown by that, because, like I said, I didn't pick that up in the book. So as this is all going down, he's tied up, he's dragged into the castle. Now you got to remember, folks, now this is nice. So the castle's all, I assume, lit by candles. Mm-hmm. It's you're in like a, you're in like almost like a cave, like a man-made cave, essentially a castle, right? But it's like a brick cave, lit by these lanterns, and his partner is dead on the ground. The dogs are dead around the stove, and his own recording of himself reading this poem is playing during this chaotic scene. That is wild. Right. So, wow. So the murders are here and all that while that's going on too, and experiencing the same kind of really bizarre atmosphere. So, yeah. So he doesn't last long when this all comes to a head now at this point. No, he wound up getting shot 5 times in the head. There's a famous, one of the other really bizarre things about this case, self-portrait that he had done 2 years before the murders. Joey had dreamed it and described it to Charles. Charles got up and painted it, and it shows him gagged with 5 bullet holes in his head, which is exactly how he died. And the murders never saw or heard anything about that painting. It's just one of, like I said, dozens of really, really bizarre things about this case. Right. And I think you pointed out in the book, like he's like his own self-portrait in that condition is like looking down on himself in that state. It's like, that is so eerie. Like, that's uncanny. I don't even know how you even, and you mentioned in the book that he says, like, I don't know if it was his last words, but certainly among his last words were like, I asked for this or something like that. Right? Yeah, that's when he saw Joey's body there, I think that was him blaming himself, because he always let everybody come over. He invited people in, not into the manor. They kind of forced their way into that, but and that's what ultimately wound up killing him. Yeah. It's really a tragedy in a lot of ways. It is a tragedy. It's like these guys says they were really great guys. Yeah. And this. They did not deserve in any way what happened to them. And senseless tragedies, the word I was completely senseless. And like I said, then these guys, it wasn't even for much of anything at all, so. Right, right. That's the, you certainly, you can't like, oh, this is better than that or whatever. It's not like they stole $1 million. You can be like, well, that was quite the heist and da da da.
Yeah.
It's like, no,
Nothing
senseless
excuses it.
idiots. It's just two clowns.
Right. Nothing excuses it, but that makes it even worse.
Right, right. Yeah. It's ridiculous. So they end up, this guy, where's the name here? The younger guy, Brock, he's a minor, so he manages to cut a deal. But along the way, some poor other guy dies too. That we don't want to leave him out. So,
like I said, here they're driving this Jeep with that was not inconspicuous. They decide, hey, we really need to get a different vehicle. And from what I understand, they decided they needed a Toyota Corolla. I don't know why, but that was what they landed on. So they pull into one of those visitor center parking lots, the rest stops.
right.
And there was a Navy officer who was sleeping in his Toyota Corolla there. And so they decided they needed it. They forced the guy out of the car, take him in the woods. But they say they just intended to tie him up and leave him there, but he tried to escape, and that's why they shot him and killed him. I don't really believe that they ever had any intention of letting him live, but that's their story. So he died in Mississippi, and they wound up being prosecuted for that. But the whole thing about them getting caught, was a whole nother bizarre story. Not caught. Surrendering themselves basically. Avery had split up from Tony. Because obviously he's 17, the other one's 40. They had a lot of differences anyway. They were in a strip bar, and Avery said, I'm out of here. He winds up heading back home and calls his mama, I think from Marietta, Georgia. Rumor is that mama's phone was tapped. I don't know if that's the case or not, but anyway, the police promptly show up, from Chattanooga County down in Marietta, Georgia, and he surrenders himself peacefully. Tony, though, is a whole nother story about his surrender. Do you want me to tell that one?
If you'd like, you sound like you like that story.
I love that story.
All right, there you go.
I've never known anybody ever who worked so hard to get himself arrested. So, like I said, one of the rumors about, the curse of Corpsewood is, vehicles. People have a lot of problem with vehicles. The murderer's vehicle didn't work. Tony decides to turn back finally because it's getting close on Christmas. So he's heading home. It's Christmas Eve. He drives across the road, right across the road from Georgia into Tennessee. It's pouring down rain. And I don't mean just sprinkling, not just pouring, but like sheets of rain, and his car stops. So he's like, fine. And you see, it's right down the road from a well-known real dive bar, the Palomino Club. So, it's within sight. So he decides he's going to walk to that, gets soaked along the way, gets there, and there's this off-duty police officer standing outside. And so Tony goes up to him with his arms out in front of him, saying, okay, I'm the guy you're looking for, go ahead and take me in. And the police officer's like, what you're talking about? He's, kill those guys in Chattanooga County. Look on the NCIC, and the guy looks him up, and he doesn't find him to start with. He's like, oh, try it again. Doesn't find him. It's Christmas Eve. This police officer doesn't want to be arresting some Looney Tune. He wants to go home to his family. So Tony keeps on, call Chattanooga County, they'll tell you. So, he does. And Chattanooga County says, yeah, we're looking for that guy for murder. So, he winds up arresting him, taking him across the line to the police department in Rossville, Georgia, which is a tiny, very southern, small town police department, where they have Tony sitting out in the lobby smoking a cigarette. He's not even, they don't put him in a cell or anything. He's just sitting there when Chattanooga County comes. Well, then Chattanooga County decides, it could be a problem because they brought him from Tennessee down here to Georgia. There might be an extradition problem. So they decide to drive Tony back in this rain across the line into Tennessee and make him walk back across the line into Georgia so they don't have any extradition problem. Like I said, I've never known anybody that worked so hard at getting themselves arrested. So.
Yeah, it's quite a... yeah, the whole, Yeah, it really does have the sort of trappings of one of those sad Dateline episodes you see, because these guys are just hapless, and the poor guy with the Toyota, it's like just the worst luck of just there's always someone like that. Well, not always, but there's very often people like that who are like the tertiary victims of these cases, where it's like, oh, turns out you were just at the wrong rest stop, dude, and you ran into two dudes who murdered a pair of gay Satanists, and now you're shit out of luck too. So,
yeah, that was it. Yeah. Total bad luck. I mean, he was sleeping in his car. That's all he was doing.
Right.
Tony, too, by the way, confessed 8 times without saying anything about drugs. And then the prosecution had to reveal to the defense that they'd found this LSD in Charles's desk drawer. So, of course, he tells, the lawyer tells Tony goes and research, and he admits this on the stand that he researched LSD while he was in jail. And then he comes up with this whole big story on the 9th confession, I guess it was, about how they drugged him and he thought that the dogs were lions and those trees were glowing or what. And that's the reason the murders happened, and right. Avery at the time said that's, a bunch of bull. That didn't happen. But that's that was his way to try to get out of it.
Right, exactly.
Was wrong. They did give him the death penalty. So Tony.
Yes, yeah. Well, the book's a great. Also, there's also sort of another aspect of the book that's a lot of fun, which is sort of like you take us through all these different characters of like the legal system down there at the time, which sound like a lot of really interesting, colorful individuals who were sort of grappling with sort of sound a little bit like a turf war kind of, but also sort of like an ego. A lot of egos involved in the prosecution and trial of these guys.
I love the book Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, and what I love about it is all the different colorful characters. So I said because there are a ton of colorful characters in Northwest Georgia, so I'm gonna put them all in there and I'm gonna lay it out exactly what they were like. So Red Lominick was probably the most colorful and the most redneck of all of them. He was the DA at the time. I worked for him for a while, and so I had plenty of good stories about Red.
Yeah.
He was the one that would spit tobacco in court and talk about, well, it's the fly on the iceberg. He always mixed up his metaphors, and I mean, he's a fun one to tell stories about.
And you worked with him. So did he talk a lot about this case, or was it kind of like something you had to pry out of him?
Like I said, he was about as redneck as you could get. He called them the butterflies. That's what he called gay people. It was that butterfly case, that devil worshiper case, and yeah, I mean, it was, got more publicity than hardly any other case that was around, while he was the DA. So yeah, he loved talking about it.
Interesting. Yeah. So ultimately, this winds up with the juvenile, the Avery Brock. He ends up just getting life in prison. He cuts a deal, right? And then
treated as a juvenile. He was pretty much emancipated. So.
Okay. All right. Well, he was like 17. I thought that was kind of how he kind of skated a little bit from the.
This was at a time when 14 was the age of consent in Georgia. So 17. So.
All right, but he cuts a deal essentially. It's sort of the idea of like the first to talk gets the best deal kind of thing. So he rolls over and takes a deal for life, and then the Tony West. You kind of go through the whole thing. We don't necessarily have to go through all the legal sort of twists and turns, but he gets sentenced to death. He's found guilty, and surprisingly, you lay it out sort of the case they made just now that he was drugged and everything, which doesn't really hold up. But the jury didn't necessarily even know that because they couldn't show that evidence that the LSD wasn't in the wine bottles. But interestingly, you mentioned the judge was like, oh, they're never going to give this guy the death penalty. But the jury turned over like 2 or 3 hours or something like that. You said that they found him guilty right away.
Yeah, they found him guilty pretty quick and gave him the death penalty, no problem. The issue was the judge knew there was a problem with the case before he ever tried it. That they didn't have enough women on the panel that the grand jury was selected from, because back then they had what they called, jury commissioners, blue ribbon commissioners that went out in the community and they decided which one of their friends that were the best people that ought to be on the grand jury. Forget having a computer pick thing or anything being random at all. They picked it. And of course, they all thought, well, them women should be home taking care of their babies and their husbands. So they didn't have enough women on that panel. Judge knew it beforehand, but there had been another high publicity case right around the same time. Alabama got the jump on him and managed to try their case before Judge Loggins got to try his on that case. So he was bound to determine the people of Chattanooga County won a death penalty case, and I'm giving it to them now.
Right.
So.
Yeah. So it was an error on his part, and then people were all mad.
Tons of money, death cases are expensive,
It's you make that point, which most people don't really even think about, but it's like the little town has to pay for this case, and it was a huge expense. And then they were like, "Oh shit, we don't want to do this again." So they, through some legal sort of political movements and everything, they get it out of town. They move the case, then they cut the deal, and he goes to jail for life too, right?
Right.
And these two guys are in jail. Have they? Especially nowadays with the media and everything, chasing down these old stories. Have these two guys ever said much about what went down?
Kenneth has told some friends or whatever. Someone recently told me that one of Kenneth's or Avery, one of his relatives managed to smuggle in a camera and videotape something. If that ever happened, I've never seen that videotape. I did get a letter from him. I wrote both of them. He's the only one who answered. So, he did communicate some. His story had changed a little bit. But he's never been anything that's gotten really a whole lot of publicity as far as his story. Tony, from what I understand, never talked other than to family, friends, or whatever. After that, Tony's dead now. Avery's still alive.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, it's there's no, I can't give Avery Brock any sort of leeway on this because he's a murderer and everything. But there is a part in the book where he sort of says, and I guess that's what hooked me on the juvenile part, where he just kind of lays out, maybe this was in the letter he wrote to you or somewhere, where he's just like, he was 17. He had no life. He's like,
he never had a life, never had a girlfriend.
Yeah. Some wasted life. Like he didn't, it's just sad. It's just sad.
I was always a little surprised that he hadn't ever gotten parole because he was so young and because he didn't have a violent history when he went in. So I don't know what's happened since he's been in jail. I got to think that, something's happened that's, made him stay there. And I've had a couple of people lately that have said, we know him, we still communicate with him. You won't believe his story. And I was like, tell me, I want to hear his story. You find out, tell me, I'm interested.
Yeah. But it was like, when you take it in that perspective, it's like, this is a lost person who did a terrible thing. And it's just like a really, I certainly wouldn't call him another victim, but it's like, he's a victim of a whole different thing. It's just a bad situation all the way around.
He was a product of his environment. Tony was just a bad seed.
Right, exactly.
From the beginning.
Yeah, right. So then after this all goes down, you said this, how do you burn down a brick castle?
That I'm not real sure about. I mean, there were, I'm sure there was, some wood around and probably, I'm sure they used some accelerants and maybe some sledgehammers. I don't even know how that all came about. But also since then, there have been a lot of people that wanted a souvenir that came into bricks from Corpsewood. There have been a lot of people because they said, you take something from Corpsewood, then you're going to have bad luck from then on. A lot of people after they took it that brought those bricks back. So there's a whole pile of bricks around there.
Right. Yeah. It's got like this.
So that's, I've been going there since the time that I wrote the book. It's been till November. There'd been, a number of years, but, it gets more and more dilapidated every time I see it, and nature's reclaiming it, so, we try to, when we went to pull some of the vines and trees and stuff off of things, but, nature will have its way. So.
Yeah. Well, what's it like? Because, I might be down that way later this year, so I might want to swing through and check this out. What's it like there now, and can you go there? I assume you can just get. It's okay to go there, relatively okay.
The person who currently owns it is not really paying attention to it. The guy who had it didn't know what he had for a long time, and then when he finally found out, then he started posting for a while that no trespassing unless you ask me first. So I would always ask him before I'd go there. But now, some other family of his is in charge of it, but I don't think they really are paying any attention to it at all. So a lot of people have been, we'll go by there. It is very difficult to get through. When we went in November, I wound up tearing up the belly pan of my car, and the roads were really, really rough. Now I went back, had another podcaster a documentary guy that wanted to go out there, and I said, and he wanted to interview me. I said, you can interview me if you'll take me out there, because I'm not going out there in my car. Car. So we went out, and the roads were not as bad as they had been before. So I think maybe they'd come through and graded it some, but it's not easy. Basically, you go till the road runs out, and then you go another mile down a dirt road, and you have to find the right place to turn off, and you have to find the right place to pull off, and then you have to hike half a mile through the woods to get to it. So
wow,
that is what's involved. So you don't, if you don't know, then you're not going to get there. So
interesting. All right. Now I'm not sure if I want to swing through. Yeah, interesting. All right. Yeah, because I would love to kind of walk around the grounds there and just sort of get what's it feel like when you're there?
I think it feels really peaceful now. I don't think it's always been like that, and I have my own theory about that and why things have changed, and I'm going to put that in the new book as well.
Yeah.
But right now, like I said, I think it feels really peaceful out there. The people that I went out with before some of for this documentary, last week, were some paranormal folks. So they had some of the equipment or whatever, and they got some really wild results on there. I know that it said my name, which I've never heard from any paranormal piece of equipment before, a couple of times, but a lot of things that were consistent with what happened in the case, some things like that. But there are a lot of people that will say, oh, it's haunted or whatever. I've never hadn't had any direct experience of that myself, other than, like I said, what happened the other day. But I talk about it in the book. I don't know if you got to that part or not, that after I turned in my first draft, I'd gone to get a massage. And I'm talking to the guy who's doing it. He's a young guy, and I was telling him, I just finished this book, about these two, gay men that got murdered. And he's like, where was that at? And I said, oh, that was in Tryon. He said, was that a long time ago? I said, yeah. He said, well, I've been out there before. We used to be a big, I think it probably still is, a place where the high school kids go on a dare. And he was talking about he'd gone out there with his high school buddies. And, there's only one space at the part where you have to pull off before you hike down through the woods. There's no room for another car, and you couldn't miss if there was one there. So they go hike down there. And even though there was no other car there, here's these two guys, he said, in lawn chairs set up where like the dining area used to be in the house. When it was still standing. And he said, they talked to him. He said, they were a little ragged looking, and they told him, the two guys told him about what had happened there a long time ago. And, they said they came there the same day every year. And this was just sounding a little weird to me. So I said, was this in the winter time? He said, well, I don't know, but it was cold out. And he said, anyway, so, he and his buddies go hike, they come back, the guys are gone. And I said, well, now these two guys, what they look like. He said, one was blonde and one had dark hair. And I said, was the little one, was the blonde little and the dark hair one big? And he said, yeah. And I had a picture out in my car that I thought at the time was Charles and Joey, but it wasn't. It was Charles and another guy who I don't know who the other one was. Anyway, I went out to the Charles is the little blonde one. So I went out to the car, brought the picture in, and the guy's jaw literally dropped. And he said, that's the guy I saw. He said, I don't know who this other guy is. He said, but this is the guy that I saw. He's even dressed sort of the same way as he was then. And the reason I believe that is he didn't know he's telling me a ghost story. He just thought
right
about these two weird guys who met in the middle of the woods. So
right. Yeah.
So that one, that is the most convincing ghost story I've ever heard out there. And I was really excited that I got that story.
I bet. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I have sort of a theory, and maybe you agree in a sense. But yeah, my theory would be that you probably feel a sense of calm or peace out there because, like, I think they like you. You told their story, you know. So if their spirits are there, they probably love you because you have captured their story for eternity. You have told their story in the most, careful and thoughtful way. I mean, I can't imagine that their response would be anything but admiration and appreciation. So maybe when you go there, there's sort of a sense, and I have a feeling. I mean, I don't want to put thoughts in your. I have a feeling you have a certain affinity for these two unfortunate men who were murdered. It's like, so it's, it's like this sort of you never met these people, but there's a kinship there that I think maybe manifests when you visit.
Yeah, I wish I had known them. But I'll tell you what, maybe more the reason that they like me is I knew that they liked, it used to be called Eskimo pies, and now they're like, hunky bars or something like that, ice cream bars. So the very first time I ever went out there, before I ever wrote the book, when I was still researching, I brought one because there was like a little campfire area where people put a lot of trash. So I just left the ice cream there and said, hey, I know you guys like this, brought this for you,
Yeah.
And so I figure, maybe that's part of the reason they like me too.
Yeah, I think for sure. It's a really sort of interesting dynamic because it's like, yeah, I believe there's some sort of afterlife or whatever. I'm sure if they're out there, they know that you wrote the book, and it's probably like, I think they like you. Yeah. So it's so interesting.
Not all their friends like my telling of the story because, like I said, they have different friends, and the ones who are the good church going friends, would say, no, they didn't have all this sex, and no, he didn't have anything to do with the Church of Satan, and no, that LSD was just a souvenir.
Oh, really? So
it's a quote. So they don't like. Some of the friends don't like my book because I talk about that stuff, but I also document it. Here's the text from the church, to the Church of Satan. Right. Here's the letters to the guys in, the prison that are fairly explicit, so, and from my point of view, they're the ones being prejudiced. I'm like, if this is how they wanted to live, that's their right, and I'm not going to judge them for that, and if you're saying, no, they didn't do that because that would have been a bad thing to do, you're the judgy one,
Right, exactly. Especially this day and age. Who are these friends? Like friends they knew in Tryon, or friends from back in Chicago, or
a neighbor, Joey's family, people that have gotten to know some of those folks who never really knew these guys to start with, but
right.
That's how
now
wrapped up in it.
So you've really piqued my interest because as I said, I read the book over the weekend, and so now you're telling me there's another book that might be coming along. And so my question before we get into that necessarily is, you wrote what I consider and what seems to be the definitive book. This was like 10 years ago. Since you wrote the book, I have to imagine you've heard from people. As you said the other day, you heard from someone who was in the picture. I have to imagine you've heard from many people who knew these folks or visited the castle or had some additional information concerning this story, right?
Yeah, I have a Facebook page for the book, and so right when it first came out, I paid a lot of attention to a lot with it, and then I just kind of didn't do anything with it for a long time because my book came out in 2016, so 10 years ago.
Yeah, 10 years.
And so I've just recently started posting on that again, and I've been hearing from a lot of people. My next book is not. It's about Tryon as a whole because, like I said, there were some other really, really bizarre crimes that happened at the same time.
You mentioned the book. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to talk about those in this book, and the History Press got sold to Arcadia after I turned in my first draft. So instead of the great editor I had to start with, I wound up with an asshole editor from Arcadia who made me take all the stuff about the other crimes out. He tried to cancel my contract twice, saying, "Oh, this is only going to sell a couple dozen books at most." It's one of their most popular titles. So I didn't get to write that stuff. And people that I'd had that reviewed the book for me before, reviewed my draft. That was some of their favorite parts of the book. So I'm like, I'm going to put that stuff in there, but I'm also want to talk about what is going on with Tryon that made, these people that never been in trouble, any kind of violent trouble before, they hit Tryon and they do this horrible, really wild stuff. So, that's what I want to know, what's going on with that too.
And you explain, do you have a theory? You don't necessarily have to give it to me.
I have a few different theories. So that, and I've been exploring some of the different ones with some of the people. I think I touched a nerve a little bit when I was asking. I was trying to find out, because sometimes when you get stuff like that, it's because there's somebody who's really, what did I call it? I called it dangerously charismatic, like Charles Manson, or, people who can get people to do bad stuff that would never have done anything like that. So I was trying to find out if there's anybody like that around. And, and some of the examples I gave included snake handlers. Well, this snake handler church question got a whole lot of people riled up, and they all denied that happened in Tryon. But if people wanted to do that in their religion, then they should be able to do what they want to do. And I agree, they should be able to. Yeah, that wasn't my point. I was just trying to find out, because if you got a snake handling church where people who don't want to handle snakes are being persuaded to do that against their will, those are the kind of people who can persuade them to do that. Those are the kind of people I was looking for. So
interesting. Is this going to be in the new book?
Yeah, this is going to be in the new book. Yeah, like I said, I have a few theories, but that's one of them. A dangerously charismatic person. Was there anybody like that around that maybe was, the people that stay in the shadows and the outskirts, but lots of bad stuff happens around them.
Right. Now you mentioned the. I said I had it in my notes here. The Dove Broadcasting documentary. You said it never aired in Georgia. Was that just because it was too controversial or something? Now it's.
I think it did air in Georgia. It was just it was really old. I had never seen it before because it happened. She did that back around the time of the murders. So
right.
It was really old, but they aired it for Halloween one year, and so I watched the Halloween episode. I was like, when I heard that recording, I was like, oh my God, my jaw just dropped. I couldn't believe that, since that was exactly word for word, and the portions of the poem even that I was going to start the book with, that I had written out and typed out already, and here he is saying them on the morning of his death. So. Yeah.
Has there been, beyond that, has there been any sort of major documentary about this? This feels like the kind of case that should be on Netflix or one of those streaming services.
Well, there's an investigation ID thing, but it was not. It didn't stick real closely with the story. They had them living in some southern mansion or with electricity and all that kind of stuff. I never saw that one, but I hear people complain about that one. I've had 2 different studios contact me about possibly optioning the rights for a feature film, but that was right before COVID happened, and that ruined everything there. So I still think that, there will probably be something eventually, because, it has everything Hollywood loves: drugs, sex, rock and roll, Church of Satan, what more can you ask for? So
it's got it all. It's a really wild story.
And the curse and the ghost and all that too. Yeah, you're not
right. Yeah, the stuff we haven't even touched on. Yeah, the curse and an alleged demon that was conjured. We'll leave people to wait for that, and just a lot of just really colorful characters and parts of the story. I loved the book. I was it was great, and you did a tremendous job telling that story. I could tell, like I said, I could tell you really went over it with a fine-tooth comb and really sort of wanted to back up everything with facts. And where it was rumors and stuff, you say it's okay, this is a rumor, but we know this for sure, kind of thing.
Yeah, I interviewed 40 people because I knew all these people that were in the the legal business and the law enforcement business and all that that were involved with that, and it's a fascinating story. It was a blast to write. I've written 3 books, right, working on the 4th now or whatever. This is by far my favorite, as far as not just because it's such a bizarre story, but because of the people that are involved in the story. Like I said, getting to write about them was so much fun.
Now, I kind of mentioned this earlier, but I want to put a finer point on it. So after the book came out, I'm sure you heard from a lot of people. Did you hear anything in particular that you were like, oh, wow, that's something I wish I had known when I wrote the book? You know what I mean?
Well, the thing that I told you about the massage guy, that was after I turned in my first draft. I went out to the parking lot, called my editor and said, and dictated to her over the phone the story to put in there. So that was the best one. But trying to think, sometimes with something like this, it's such a wild story, you'll hear really crazy stuff. Yeah. So that was stuff that I wouldn't really want to put in the book. I may have put it in there about the guy who said he saw Bigfoot tied up.
Yeah, it's in the book. It's the Bigfoot,
non-existent basement that never existed.
You can always count on Bigfoot to show up at some point.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's not the only time he's come up in the story, but I'm sure there are things that I'd wish later on that I'd put in. The stuff about the that type plane. I didn't know it had been playing at the time of the murder.
Yeah,
that's not in my book. I found that out later, and so that is something that I want to put in. There's some other things that I want to talk about. There are some people that are dead now, but I was a little afraid to talk about some of this stuff, like about the so-called diary. Guest book or whatever. I couldn't tell that story in there because I was just a little afraid it might have some fallback that would not be pleasant for me. But they're all dead now, so I can write that stuff. And I hear, I hear more and more of those kind of things. That story, the whole story behind that one is really fascinating. So I was excited about that. But those things I'm going to put in the new book.
There you go. Awesome. All right. Now, let's just talk a little bit here about Chattanooga Ghost Tours, because this is your other passion here. You started it almost 20 years ago now. So I imagine you were maybe not the first, but among the first sort of these ghost tour.
I was the first one in Chattanooga, and there were not a whole lot, around the country at the time that I first got started. But like I said, I'd taken them with my kids before, some different places, Savannah and Nashville and such, and had a lot of fun. So when I decided to retire from practicing law, I said, I'm going to see if there's enough here. And it has just been a joy. I love everything about the business. It's so much more fun and so much less stress than practicing law. I love telling stories. I love researching. So, and I love hearing, because we hear stuff from our guests too. They'll come in, they'll bring us their ghost pictures, or we have a lot of guests that get ghost pictures on our tour, which we put those online, on our Facebook page and stuff. So it's just a lot of fun.
Now, I assume that you've done countless ghost tours at this point, right? Because
I do not conduct them myself.
Oh, okay.
Ever.
Right.
There's one tour that I loved it so much, and I didn't have a guide to do it to start with, that I led it a couple times. It was around the shoot or whatever, but I hire people that are more entertaining than me to
I get you. All right.
I do the business end and the research and all that. And I greet customers at the beginning because I just like talking to people. Okay. I'm really picky about guides. It takes me, I've taken 2-3 years before to find a new guide, just because I am picky about them, because I want to make sure they're great. But that's why our reviews are like 5-star reviews. People love us because I have great guides. So
excellent. Well, I'm going to make my way down to Chattanooga at some point. Our mutual friend Adam Sane, his family lives down there, and he keeps trying to talk me to come visit Mangan
on the tour. I'd love to have you.
Well, I will definitely do that. Well, I guess the sort of the point I was making there, it turns out you don't do this, but I would assume your tour guides then have done countless tours. Do they have a lot of, because I always find that interesting. It's one thing if you're on a ghost tour, you see, but the people who do the ghost tours, they have presumably one would assume they have the most likelihood of having something happen because they're doing the tour all the time. So do they have a lot of wild stories to share where they're like, whoa, you're not going to believe it this time, Amy, this happened when we did it last night or whatever?
Some of them do. That there are some people that attract ghosts and some people don't. I don't, which I really don't think is fair because I own it. but there you go. Although I've had a few things, and the ones that I've had are doozies. But yeah, like my guides, Jason and Jessica, who probably do the most tours, both of them are the kind of people that attract that. So yeah, I get to hear great stuff from them all the time. When guests get really cool photos on our tour, then they'll tell them, yeah, send the photos in to Amy. So, I get to see a lot of those. I just put together a YouTube or something of our best ghost pictures of 2025. So,
Oh, nice.
yeah. So, and I'm not talking about just orbs. Most of the chain ghost tours, some of them will say, "Oh, we guarantee you'll get ghost pictures, but you have to use a flash and you have to use a digital camera." All they're doing is walking you past someplace dusty, so you're getting
Yeah.
That's all they'll ever have is orbs. But we have people get faces and figures, and as well as mists and things like that. So
Yeah.
And some of them
Well,
are very detailed.
You touched on a hot button topic. I don't know how necessarily you want to get into this, but the ghost tour chains. Have you had a problem yet with that? Because I know that this is a big problem. We're not going to say who. We're not. They're very litigious. Thankfully, you're a lawyer, so maybe it'll be all right. But they are very litigious. There's a certain national chain that has repeatedly run into issues with other ghost tours around the country. And have you encountered this problem down there in Chattanooga yet?
We've had more national chains in Chattanooga, and we had them earlier than I think just about everybody else, because we were named one of the top 10 ghost tours in the country by TripAdvisor and USA Today within 3 years of starting. So I think some of them said, "Oh yeah, that's the place we want to go." The one that you're talking about that's been in a lot of litigious whatever, I have not. They're here, but as soon as I heard they were coming, I sent an email to the personal email address. He was rather upset that I was able to find that, of the owner, and said, "Look, I don't have a problem with you because I understand you're going to be down by the river. That's where I used to do my tours, but we don't. So, you don't tell lies about us or whatever. And I'm cool with you being there. But I really, really hate this other chain, and I hope you put them out of business since they're down there too." And so I haven't had any problem.
I didn't know there were multiple chains. Okay. Jeez.
Oh, yeah. No, the other one is so much worse, but it's not as many places. But yeah, the other one, the one that I don't like, the one that's not in as much, but they're in litigation against each other right now.
Oh boy. Okay. Yeah.
But, the other one, they came around and told business owners when they first came to town here, the first time they came to town, that I would be out of business within 6 weeks. Well, as it turns out, they were gone in 5. So that
there you go.
Fortunately, they've come back, but they've run Google ads that said Chattanooga Ghost Tours official webpage. I got Google to take that one down, but they've just done so much really sneakier even stuff than what you hear about the other chains. So, and there have been a couple of other chains that have come and gone, and they never stayed very long. So those two, the biggest ones, are the ones who are here now and have been here the longest.
Yeah, I think, a lot of people probably, I'm tuned into this because of my work with Coast to Coast and sort of hearing about this and knowing.
Yeah.
It's quite a situation there. I didn't realize it was even that much worse. But yeah, for people who don't know, it's these national chains that come in and sort of mimic the mom and pop local chain, and add a lot of market confusion to the situation. And some say take the stories from the original ghost tours and just appropriate them themselves. It's a really cutthroat, kind of shady subculture in a way that I had really no idea about.
Well, the chain that I really don't like, when they first came, I used to have everybody sign waivers that said they agreed not to retell our stories for profit. But then their tour, was, they were using our stories. But that was down when we were a different location. After we moved, I was fine. I didn't care about anybody using the ones down by the river or whatever.
Right.
But then I think the one that you're talking about, when it came in, I think it got a lot of the stories from that one, which had originally come from me. But like I said, I don't care if they tell those stories because I'm not telling them anymore. And I've actually been tempted to have my guides tell the stories and put them out, on widely on for free online. So that way, look, you can hear these stories they're telling for free, but I haven't done that.
That's not
I'm trying to be a fair person.
There you go. So the moral of the story for the folks listening is if you go to Chattanooga, obviously you want to do ChattanoogaGhostTours.com. But if you go to any of these places,
Go with local independent.
Go local. Yeah. Do your research and find out what the most local is and patronize that tour, because those are the folks who dug up the stories and laid the groundwork.
Guides too, because they're the ones who care, who love their tours, so
yeah.
And aren't just in it to make a buck in every city they can get in.
Exactly. Yeah. It's an unfortunate situation, but yeah, I didn't realize it was as widespread as you mentioned. So, usually we wrap it up. What's next for you? You've been teasing this new book. So when do you think the new book will come out? Do you have a title yet? I want to read it.
The title's going to be Beyond Corpsewood, because like I said, we're talking about the greater town. Yeah. It'll be out sometime this year. I keep pushing it back because, like I said, I love research and I go down every rabbit hole. So, that's what I've been spending a lot of time doing, that more than I had originally intended to, but it's going to make it a better book. So.
Awesome. Beyond Corpsewood. All right. And folks can keep an eye on you. Where do you have I know obviously Chattanooga Ghost Tours is your website for the ghost tours, but do you have a place you want to send folks for?
I have Facebook pages for the ghost tour, for the Corpsewood book, for Haunted Chattanooga, and for Ghostly Tales of Chattanooga, which is like a children's version.
Hey.
Yeah. So any of
jump off of there for the other stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Any of those places you can find out. There
you go. Well, Amy, I can't thank you enough. This was so much fun. I loved the book. Once I got started into it, I just pretty much just lost myself over the weekend reading it. It was just such a compelling story, and kudos to you for telling the story and doing justice to, Dr. Charles Scudder and Joey Odom. They deserve to have their story told in full, and you did a tremendous job at it. You really did. It was, by the end, I was really sad at the end. I'm like, what a tragic story this was. And I appreciate you telling it.
It was so unnecessary, but thank you so much for having me on. You can tell I love talking about this case.
Absolutely. Yeah.
With you.
And I had a blast. So we'll be talking again when Beyond Corpsewood comes out, and who knows, maybe when I pass through Chattanooga in the future, we can hang out. I would love that. I think we'd have a lot of fun. So thank you so much for coming on the show again.
Sounds great. Thank you. Bye-bye.